Hi, everybody. We're going to get started talking about everybody's character. And in this particular um, segment of the assignment, what you were doing was adding a background and some text. We're going to talk about the background and text today, of course, but we'll also continue to talk about the character and what we can do to make it more, you know, just bring it to life a little bit more, anything we can do. But I would say that primarily um, at this stage, finding a good background is actually, it takes a little bit of playing around and experimenting. Um, so uh, don't be surprised if you have to keep playing around to find a good one. I find that it's really the most important part at this phase. There's a number of reasons. So actually, I brought the examples. You've probably looked at these examples before. I've had them posted to the classroom, but I thought we would just look at them. Now, these are examples that are from week 5, like the very end of class. So everything has been really, resolved at this point. So just keep that in mind that your particular characters at this point do not have to look as polished as this. But one of the things that we can really learn from these particular designs is just how simple the background really needs to become in order for the character to look like a character to stand out. In general, like when we call something a background, we call it a background because it is like a backdrop or a background or a negative space where there's not usually as much going on. And that's true for any design you really make, is that you always want to think of the foreground, which is what you want people to be, seeing as the focal point, and then, the background, which is where is your kind of, it's just supposed to be secondary. But I think it's even more important in this particular type of project, I've learned, because the character itself is made out of objects that you're putting together. And each of those objects becomes a character, which, we want it to become a character and look like a character, but it's still each of those objects still looks like one of the objects. Like these still look like chili peppers and orange slices and a little lettuce leaf. So it becomes more important for the background to be simple, really simple, because of the fact that these are all objects. And if you put them on something that's like kind of complicated or a little bit busy, or what happens is that the character starts just blending into the background. It becomes a group of objects. We can't see it clearly as being a character, like a unified um, character anymore. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important, I have found. Um, okay, some things to keep in mind with the background is that you can have objects, like this one has a little apple here, but notice how it's off to the side. It's like we're not even seeing the whole thing. It's off to the side. So behind the character, it's very, very simple. This one just, has a crumpled piece of paper, so it's really just very simple texture, doesn't have a lot of details, so it also works as a background. This one here is actually kind of very misty, almost foggy looking. I think the student who did this did a lot of blurring, kind of selective blurring of the photograph, trying to really kind of make it simple, but you still see a little bit of detail, but it doesn't get in the way. This one is very kind of blurred in places, but there's these little raindrops that, give it a little detail, but still allow the character to stand out. This is just, in general, you want to have a photograph. This student actually went with a kind of a vectory background, and I thought it worked really well for a character. So I thought, hey, I think it's okay. It still has it gives it a lot of context for the character. But in general, you do want to work with a photograph. This one is probably the most detailed, um, and it works pretty well because the photograph itself is darker. Even though it has more detail, it's darker, and the character is kind of more saturated and a little lighter, so it stands out. So you kind of want to, again, it's like about playing with things, but you know, a lot of times like close-ups really work. Like you can see that a few of these are based on close-up backgrounds, like where we zoom in. So you want to create context in the sense of like a sense of space, you know, like the kind of the counter with the fruit, or you know, the kind of the sort of little rainy garden, or the paper for Garbage Dump Dan, or the you know, the grill, the stage. You want that sense of context, but think about how you can do it in the simplest way possible. Like maybe you just need like a little hint of something happening there, you know? So like a really big scene with a lot of detail, a lot going on won't work for your character. It's all about trying to figure out ways. Maybe again, maybe it's blurring, maybe it's close-ups, maybe it's just very sort of simple texture that somehow brings your character to life. Okay, okay, that's the main thing I wanted to talk about here, because I think I noticed when we look at everyone's projects, I think everybody's going to have to work on that a little bit, I think. And I'm not going to talk probably too much about text, maybe a little bit if we have some issues with legibility, but in general, I find that most folks do a really good job with the text. It's something that I think, you know, people really, you know, develop nice text treatments. So I think that's something that, yeah. And so, okay, that's what we're up to this week, is working on the background, working on the character, try to see if we can get that, you know, starting to get closer to being finished at the end of this week. Yeah, so I actually think your background is getting pretty close to being a good background. Still maybe has a bit too much detail in places, but I think we could probably fix that. By maybe doing a little blurring. But let's just, first of all, I want to go back and talk a little bit about your character. Let's start with that. Um, Overall, I think your character design is coming along pretty nicely. I like how sort of big and bold it is. I actually like the way he's or she's kind of springing out of the page. You know, there's something very bold about it. And I also like this text. It's a tiny bit hard to read. Maybe we could play with that a little bit. Um, maybe not so much. I like kind of angled look, but maybe a little bit less, so that this word, you know, this word seems to be getting a little bit lost. So you might play with that a little bit more. But I also like the color harmony that you've got with green and yellow. That's something I'm going to talk more about next week with color harmony, you know, is getting people to pick colors, like a few colors. So, but I think you're actually already at that point of having a good color harmony. I don't think you really actually need to work on that anymore. Um, you can just keep going with that. Okay, so in terms of your characters, so I'm noticing there's still a little bit of layer mask edges here that you could work on a little bit more. Let's just look here at what's happening here. So that's actually a really good shape. It's a really nice, it should be, we'll see, you know, sometimes things are harder to select, but it's a little, can you see there's that rough edge, and we'd kind of ideally like to get it looking like nice and round, you know, like this edge here. So if I were you, what I would do with this particular guy is, rather than trying to kind of fix this layer mask, which sometimes it's easier to start over. So I would actually just drag this layer mask to the trash, just delete it, and see maybe, I'm going to take the quick selection here, see if I can select that edge. So I'm just going to go around here. So it's kind of, okay. Okay, so that's good. It looks like it's an even selection. That's good news. And now we'll just apply the layer mask. Okay, so can you see that's a little bit better? So that was just using the quick selection tool. At this point too, it's still maybe a tiny bit, let's just double click on the layer mask here, and we can just kind of maybe smooth it out here a little bit like this. You can use the smooth. I always like to start from the top down, but I think we've got a pretty good selection, so maybe we could smooth it a little bit. So you can kind of just drag that slider to the right and see, you know, how far you can go before it So it's smoothing a tiny bit. We could even, so then will go down, maybe feather it a tiny bit. Sometimes that can help. That's looking pretty good. Yeah, so that's, let's see what that looks like. So you get the, oops, oh, see, now that's too much. Can you see what I did there? Sometimes it's hard to see, actually. Let's just change the setting right here so that we can really see that edge against some black. So that can actually be a lot better. So let's do that smoothing again, maybe a little bit of feathering. Let's see. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. It may be a little bit too much feathering. I don't know, maybe it's okay. So I would do the same thing with this guy and this guy. There's a little bit of a divot there. Anywhere you see there's a little edge that you could fix. I think those are the main areas. Um, okay, so somehow the face to me, like I mentioned before, I think that this is still not quite reading as it's still like it's not quite becoming a face yet. The eyes are. I think the eyes look terrific, but somehow these lower parts here don't seem to quite work yet. So um, I might experiment. I don't remember. I feel like I might have mentioned this before, maybe suggesting taking that off. So you could try that. Let's see. Or putting something else in its place for the mouth, like just something simple. I don't know, it looks pretty cute that way, so you could give that a try. Um, yeah, and then so also I might even like do the same thing I mentioned before with this guy here is maybe smoothing that edge off a little bit. See if you can just maybe you know, go into the layer mask and then do a little kind of feathering or smoothing of that edge. Mm. Okay, and I think the only other thing is with the background. Um, so with that background, you can there's a couple things you can do here. Um, so oftentimes when you have a photograph where you know you think the photograph's going to work well, but maybe it it can be a little detailed in certain like in normally when we look out in the world or we take a photograph into the world. Oftentimes what happens is the foreground, like our focal point, is in focus, you know, and that would include like where the character is standing. And then as we go here, you can just experiment yourself by like looking at something in your room or wherever you are, and then focus on it, like even your hand, and notice how the background is out of focus. So that's something you can actually do, is to selectively, you know, take the further away areas of the photograph and turn that and blur that like it would naturally happen. And that does two things. It makes it look more realistic, and it also puts more attention onto your character. And so, you know, what you can do here is you can just actually duplicate your layer. I'm just going to actually go the easy route here. Just duplicate the layer so I've got a backup copy in case I want to make changes later, because this can be destructive. And then I can just go up into the filter panel and go to, let's see, what do we want to do here? The blur gallery, and well, let's try a field blur. So what you can do, I have some details on how to do this, some videos in the discussion board, but you can actually put these little markers in different places, and then adjust how much blurring is happening in those places. So, for example, here, maybe at the bottom, I don't want any blur because that's going to be the closest to us. So you can kind of see, you know, put these little, you know, and then maybe up here, I want to blur more. Maybe I want to blur a lot. Because why do we need to see so much grass, right? We can see just a hint of grass at the bottom, and that's all actually we would need to see to get the idea that there's grass. So let's maybe make this a little bit more in focus. This is just, experimenting. And let's just give that a shot. So yeah, so look how much like that now becomes quite a lot more, like if we compare, let's see, the one we did it on, let's just take this off here now. There's your original, and here's the one that we changed. And notice how it still has all the wonderful color and the greenness, but the character just, everything around the character is so much more clear, like all the edges, the details. So anyone, I'm probably going to recommend this technique to a few more people. So it's something that is good to be aware of um, as a quick fix. Okay, all right. I think you're in good shape here. Just keep going and keep experimenting and work with those areas. So I love the idea of the autumn theme, turning Garden Glitter Grace into sort of an autumn kind of, just an autumn theme is a terrific idea. Um, and I like the kind of direction you're going with the color of these nice sort of warm russets. I think that's a great direction. I would say to keep experimenting with a background. You really just want to go a lot simpler. So keep just looking around. Like maybe there's just a very simple autumn landscape, maybe with a lot of sky or a lot of really kind of like just really, empty spaces. That might be a really, good, direction to go in. And, even if you don't necessarily find something that's really autumn looking in your background, that's okay because your character can really do that, can be that. So that's what I would do. I like your text. I think it's a really nice text. It's just simple, bold. I think that I like the placement of it as well. Kind of the curve, picks up on the curve of your pumpkin. I'm still kind of not liking the legs yet. They still feel a little unfinished. So if you can, I would experiment with some different legs. Um, but yeah, those are the main things I would, and keep in mind, as I mentioned in my, just my thread comments, my written comments before the assignment got started, experiment maybe with a few different options with your background. Feel free to submit them in your final submission, like 3 or 4 possible images. I'm happy to help. Like sometimes it's better to have a few, and that way you can sort of look through which ones work the best. Something else I just want to say too, and this is like a general class, and both of these are general class comments, is that I think oftentimes when we work on something for quite a long time, we know the details in and out of it. Like I've done artwork where I thought it was very clear what was happening in the artwork, but other people couldn't really see it. And that's because I knew what all of these different parts were, but other people didn't. Like, so when you add a really detailed background, you may be able to know what everything is communicating, but somebody else can get lost in all of the detail, which again is one of the reasons why the simple background is so important, because I think it's, you really do want your character to be front and center. Okay, so keep working on that. Yeah, so the same thing to you um, as Amanda. I think that you've got, like, I like the idea of the foliage in the background, but I think it's going to be too busy for your character. So I'd keep looking for something that's more simple, simple, very simple background. Maybe a close-up of something, or like just some simple kind of lawn or sky or combination, or a simple texture in the background. Doesn't have to necessarily be a three-dimensional scene. It could be like the garbage dump Dan um, example we looked at the beginning, just like a simple texture can go behind something. That can often look really good. So yeah, I'd work on that. Something else too is I would really just crop in your design to fit around your character so that it's, so that we just see a really kind of, so we really can focus on that. Um, that'll really help a lot. So that's what I'd work on, and then maybe once you work on a simpler background, I think that will help too, to be able for us to see the text, you know, um, because I think when your background is busy, it also means that it makes it hard for your text to be seen. I might consider too, rather than spreading the text around the page, maybe just put it together in a phrase, like a phrase. Again, I love the idea of scattering it, but sometimes it just makes it harder for people to read. So maybe do some kind of cool text treatment with the phrase itself, so you get that kind of creative look, but it looks more, it's a little more legible. So I'd keep working on that. Okay, so those are the two things I work on a little bit more. Rio, I'm so glad you were able to get your assignment submitted for this group critique so that we can, have a chance to talk about your character design just a little bit more. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so looks like you've got your layer mask, which is awesome. Great. That's what we did back in milestone 3 last week. Yes. And I love your text. I think it's really beautiful. And your background is really, it's a nice photograph. So a few things you want to work on a little bit more. First of all, is the name of the character. The name of the character should be the character design name from Unit 1, whichever one that was that you chose. I don't remember. So that needs to be replaced. And so that's going to be your concept, is whatever it is for your character. And then for your character, I'm going to actually remove the background for just a minute. For your character, you want to keep working on your character design a little bit more. Right now, it's a little bit hard to see it as a character. It feels more like, a little, maybe this is the character that's maybe sitting on this little horse or whatever this little animal is. So that doesn't, to me, it doesn't read quite as a character, like something that would be, like it looks like maybe a combination of characters. Or a scene, with maybe this is your character. So you really want that character to be built in a way, so I might even take this out at this point, and then maybe take out a few other things, just start. So maybe this could be something, we could move, we could maybe use that a little later potentially. Let's just take that out right now, take all of this out, and then start by building, maybe you would start by building here. This might be the start of your character. Maybe even just the head of this guy. So like the panda head here you would start with, because he's already got legs here. So, in a way, the character is right here. So you need to be building the character. So maybe just select the head here, and that'll be your head, and then start building the character below it. You can decide whatever you want to be in terms of the actual character development. You'll notice that most folks use kind of more of a human form, like arms and legs, but it doesn't have to be arms and legs. Like you could sort of build it like a bird might be built, so it could have wings. It could have multiple legs, like a little caterpillar. So that's up to, that is up to you. But again, at this stage, because it's week 4 and, we're moving, we're fast moving to our final, phases of the project, I think it's always easiest to just do arms and legs. So you might want to give that a try. Okay, so that's what I'd work on. Once you've done that, then you can think about what would be an appropriate background for the name of your character and the way it's designed. Maybe it'll end up being this, maybe not. That's something that, I would say at this point, work on the character design, change the text, use that as your final submission for this week. And then next week, we can talk more about the background, so we can have a placeholder for that, continue to kind of experiment with that next week. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions. I'm very happy that you've got an idea of how to work with the layer mask, so I know that you'll be able to develop your character a little bit more fully, based using the right techniques, which is really, really important. Okay, let me know again if you have any questions. Madison, I love the idea of a cutting board, or even like this table, behind it. I'm sorry, I'm getting so many emails. I apologize for the all of the clicks that are happening. My mother's is having surgery, and so my sisters are sending a lot of emails. Uh, yeah, wishing her the best. Anyhow, so yeah, so the cutting board idea, I would get something that's very simple, like, not, you could even just take out all of the food around it, or maybe just one piece of food, just like what we talked about at the beginning, so that it's because your character already is made out of food, so it's already really, I think, going in that direction. So maybe just like go back to Google Images, find like a simple cutting board, put it behind. I think that could work really beautifully, or a table or something, like this kind of table behind it. For the text, I like the style of text in terms of how simple it is. Something to keep in mind is like when you use this tool, the vertical type tool right in here, what it does is it actually rotates all of the text, every single little letter, and it can actually be a little hard to read that way. So sometimes it's easier to do, let's see if I can get an example to show you. I'm just going to take this out for the moment. I'm not, I don't have the ability to copy your text, but I just wanted to show you so you can take this text, just, run it horizontal, just like you normally would. Then you can go up to rotation, image rotation, and you can rotate it either 90 clockwise. I think, should we do clockwise? Oh, that's not what I wanted to do here. I wanted to do the text. Hold on. Oh, there we are. I'm sorry, I was in the wrong area. Let's see, rotate 90 clockwise there. So that way, or you can do it the other way. It's actually easier for people to read when you, like vertical text, when you rotate it like this, because all of the letters stay together in one word. And so we're only kind of flipping our minds in one direction. If you do it this way, unfortunately, every letter, then you're having to flip every letter. So I might try that. Something with the text too. I like the idea of tie-dyed. I might actually see if you can get color. I mentioned before that I was only going to talk about color next week, but I think that you're already moving in that direction. So think about maybe matching your color of your text with colors in your character. Like you've got these wonderful oranges and yellows and reds, maybe a touch of green. Maybe those could match in there. You know, that would be, I think that would be a good head start in terms of your character development. Okay, so I think that's the main thing. I'm still a little bothered by the cherries I mentioned before here with the kind of like the lumpy edges. So if you have time this week, you might want to fix that. Depending upon the background, sometimes that already starts to hide it here. So whatever your background is might actually hide that background of that lumpiness. But if it doesn't, then just feel free to maybe find another cherry that doesn't have the droplets on the edge that we talked about. Okay, all right. So I think you're going in a good direction. Okay, Ashley. Well, I think that's great that you worked with online tutoring. I'm so happy about that. Um, Okay, so, oh, I love this text. I think that's a really nice text for your character. It has this kind of casual, yet kind of almost a retro quality to it. I think that's going to work really well. Now, your background, I actually think your background is quite simple, which is good. I think it would actually highlight your character, but I'm wondering about whether a stage, well, maybe the stage idea could work for your character. Um, Maybe, so if you go with this character, one thing I would maybe think about is maybe just the reason why I'm a little bit concerned about whether this would be a good background is like why is Flippin' Food Fran on the stage? Like how does that fit in with her idea of being related to food and flipping food, made out of food, you know? So you might want to say a little bit about like why you chose that. Maybe it could work. Um, Typically people do things like put her in the kitchen or on a countertop or something relating to, a restaurant or something like that. But again, you can be creative, so if that makes sense to you, just maybe explain a little bit more about why she's on it. And then maybe as you develop her, maybe she's going to sing a little bit or she's going to do some dancing so you could sort of move her feet around or in some way kind of develop her a little bit more. If you go with this background, I think that what I would probably do is maybe just simplify it a little bit more. Like maybe the easy way to always simplify the backgrounds is by just enlarging them so that they don't have as much detail. Just by getting rid of the seats, and then maybe you'd make her larger so she's standing on the stage. That automatically helps a lot. In terms of your character, um, let's see, I'm going to just take the shadow off for now. And I would just maybe keep developing the character a little bit more. Um, can you see all these little lines around the character? These are caused by something that happens in the layer mask process. And it's actually, um, there it is. So it's part of it. I don't know why this happens. It happens sometimes when you're masking, and the way to get rid of it is actually by manually getting rid of it by clicking directly on the layer mask to select it. And then what we'll do is we'll use our paintbrush here and we'll paint with black and we'll paint over the lines here. Can you see that? I'm actually erasing them. I'm not erasing them, I'm actually masking them out. So I'm adding some black to this mask. Okay, so you could do the same with all of these other elements. Kind of just go through here, select all the layers, and then just erase them. Okay, so that's the thing I would work on the most. I'm actually going to maybe, just for the moment here, get rid of your background to look at the design just a little bit more. So I would just maybe keep experimenting with your character a little bit more. Specifically maybe how to, join the legs and arms a little bit more. I like this idea of the onion ring, but in a way what the onion ring does is it makes it a little hard to connect things because it's such a kind of, it has so much empty space in it, like it's just a ring. So if you think it would be okay, what you might want to do is maybe replace it with another food that's just like a round shape, like gives you that round shape, but maybe has more, kind of um, heaviness to it or like a visual weight to it, like any type of round fruit or vegetable, like you've got like olives here and lemons, so you've got lots of different things. Maybe it could be like an apple or an orange or an artichoke or an avocado or anything. There's so many, fruits and vegetables are, so many of them are round. So I might consider replacing that, and it'll make it a lot easier then to attach your legs because then you can kind of tuck them either behind or somehow in front. It'll make it a lot easier to work with those elements. So that's what I'd work on a little bit more. Just experiment with your character a little bit more. Um, maybe experiment with your face. It's a little busy in here. Once you add maybe a simpler background, if you choose to do that, it might make it easier to, maybe that will work. It's not quite there yet. Maybe if you could trim off this little bit of, it's almost like there's this kind of like element in here that doesn't seem like it quite belongs, like this sauce. So maybe get like a meatball that's cleaner, that doesn't have that edge to make it easier. So just kind of experiment. It's all about experimenting. Now you understand layer mask. It's just a matter of going in and playing with it a little bit more. I'd also make your character a little bit bigger to fill that space so that it really stands out. Okay? All right. I mean, I think it's just experimenting. That's really what a lot of what design is like replacing things, changing things. And I think you're going in a good direction. You've got great text. Just think a little bit more about your background, experiment a little bit more with your character. Okay, Intisar. Okay, yeah, I think that this is definitely a simple background in the sense that it's like just like really highlighting your character. Um, and And I think your text is really pretty. It really, I think, flows nicely with the sort of the elegance of Garden Glitter Grace. Uh, Looks like maybe, so it's Garden Glitter Grace. I don't mind if you change the words, but I think there needs to be an N here. So I would just kind of work a little bit more maybe on the balance of all of the different elements. I think you're ready to start thinking about color at this point because you could work with this background. So think about maybe how to blend the colors together. Like, what are your main colors? To me, when I look at this, I see pinks and greens. Those are your main colors, and pale, this kind of pastel, kind of very pale color. So that can be your palette. And so maybe your background should also be kind of like a pink or a green, like maybe a dark green. So you could experiment maybe with that. And then pinks and greens in your text, you know. I think you've got some pinks in here. Maybe add instead of the teal color, maybe change that to a green. You could experiment with that. You can experiment a little bit now too with your characters since you've gotten like I think things are working quite well. Like maybe like how will you maybe like make your character look like it's moving or standing in some way. Right now it looks like she's maybe falling a little bit, with her legs out like that. So maybe start moving them in different directions so that maybe it looks like she's standing on one hip, or she's like raising her arms, or she's dancing, or that's up to you. You can sort of think about how she's moving, so you can kind of play with that. Okay, so that's the main things I'd work on here. If you want to work with a different, as I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of hoping that people will work with photographs in their background, but I have some flexibility with that. I would just maybe think about the context, like maybe there'd be a little bit of raindrops or some kind of just something, tiny bit of context for her to be in, where she's situated. Um, and maybe that would work if you change the colors to pink and green. Maybe that would give her more of a place, a context for it. I think your shadow looks really good. So those are the things I would work on a little bit more. Just kind of experiment with the movement, with the colors, with the background, and see where you can take it to how you can take it to the next level.